We all want to know the future. We all want to know whether there is a fate destined for us in the unfolding of our lives, a destiny. The Greek tragedy said, in fact, our future was sealed already. So, what is the Jewish view? How do we understand astrology? How do we understand those who try to predict the future? And is this irreconcilable with Judaism? So, part of that fascination with astrology, it's reported that the astrological pages are or were the most popular part of a newspaper. Today, I imagine there are websites that probably get very high traffic, and it's become popular again. There were periods when astrology did make it into the front headlines, particularly in the waning days of Ronald Reagan's presidency. He was showing signs of aging, perhaps some speculated he had Alzheimer's. And Nancy Reagan was always very involved. The speculation was that Nancy Reagan, in fact, was probably running the country and that she was consulting her astrologist in order to make decisions. And sure enough, the New York Times in 1988 says that the White House confirms that the Reagans follow astrology, but only up to a point, not really, making it central to their outlook on the world. Yet it doesn't seem like that's the whole story. And here we have, in fact, an article written in 1988, not released until 4 years later. And we see up here that it was classified by the CIA. This is from the CIA's website. First Lady Astrologer cleared every move Reagan book contends. And according to their chief of staff, she consulted the astrologer for every move. Apparently, the government didn't feel like this should be public knowledge. The Reagan book referred to is actually Don Reagan, who was his chief of staff. Same name, not related. But we see already here that astrology can be viewed as controversial, and those who follow it can be viewed as being a little out of the mainstream or kooky, if you don't want to be so polite. So it finally did come out. Her astrologist wound up writing a book, a tell-all 10 years later, and how she really was consulted, how Nancy Reagan turned to her, first Ronald and Nancy, and then Nancy Reagan turned to her for, as we see here, timing of press conferences, speeches, State of the Union addresses, when to fly in Air Force One, and who knows what else. And in terms of who was running the country, we have to turn to an alternative press, Mother Jones, which describes itself as smart, fearless journalism, to tell us that, to report Leslie Stahl, CBS reporter from the time, who really did believe that Ronald Reagan was in the some stages, early stages of dementia or Alzheimer's, and that Nancy might have been running the country. And so, in fact, decisions of the most powerful country in the world might have been made by the First Lady's astrologer. But getting back to our subject at hand, what does Judaism say about astrology? So the Torah itself in the book of Leviticus says, Lo ta'onenu. Onen is one who predicts the times. What does that mean? For a person says, this is a good way to begin your work, or that is a bad hour to start off on a trip. So this is specifically forbidden in the Torah, to use signs or astrology to direct one's future actions based upon predicting what will come in the future. Now, with that said, there have been Also recently, people using signs to predict. In 2012, there was a frenzy over the end of the Mayan calendar, which, in fact, many Mayan scholars said did not mean that they believed the world would end. Maybe the calendar would reset. Mel Gibson, no friend of the Jews, made a movie, Apocalypto, about the apocalypse of the Mayan civilization. And interestingly, around a more Jewish calendar theme, in 2014, 2015, there were 4 blood moons. Blood moons are full moons that occur on an eclipse. And when they're in the early evening, the light goes through the atmosphere of the Earth, and the glow of the sun is red, reflecting on the moon. So the moon looks bright red and or orangey red. And those 4 moons occurred, in fact, between Passover 2014 and Sukkot 2015 on the Jewish holidays. So you had Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. And a famous evangelical preacher, John Hagee, who is a great friend of the Jews, he predicted that something is about to change. His prediction did not come true, just reinforcing the fact that we don't use signs to predict the future. So one might think at that point, well, okay, so as Jews, we can just ignore astrology. But not so simple. Because when someone gets married, when we have a celebration, what do we say? Mazal tov. What are the mazalot? The mazalot are the astrological signs. And here to the right, we see in the mosaic floor, a beautiful mosaic of the Beit Alpha synagogue in the 6th century of the Common Era. This is up north near Beit Shan. And we have depicted all of the signs of the astrological constellations, the 12 signs of the astrological constellations, and with the Hebrew names in them. So we turn to the Talmud. And as I've emphasized, before we get to the Kabbalistic teachings, we go step by step from the Torah to the Talmud, and from the Talmud then to the Kabbalah, through other commentaries and philosophers as well, because the Kabbalah is really built upon the teachings of what we call the revealed Torah. And so in order to understand even the foundation on which the Kabbalah is teaching, we have to look at the foundational Torah sources. And we've also emphasized that some of the Kabbalistic ideas are already found in the Torah or in the Talmud. So really, it's a one continuum. So in the Talmud, page 156, at the end of Shabbat, and here we're going to see in Moed Katan, there is extensive discussion and commentaries about Mazal, about astrological signs. The first teaching, Rava said, 3 things are not dependent on merit, but on Mazal, lifespan, offspring, and sustenance. Okay, how long we're going to live, whether we will have children, and our livelihood, our wealth. So 3 important things in our life, 3 major things in our life. Now, what does it mean, mazal? So literally, zol means a flow. So it means an energy coming down into the world. And that energy can be prosperity, so we will become wealthy. It could be directing the size of our family or how long we live. And so that mazal has come to mean a predetermined fate for us, or a particular blessing, or a direction that our life is going to take. Now, beyond that, we have a entire page of Talmud which talks about astrological readings. And there are different systems. The one we're most familiar with is the sun signs and the monthly signs around the solar calendar. The Talmud is going to start with the weekly astrological impact on our lives. Now, how can the Talmud give astrological readings? We just said you're not allowed to predict. So it doesn't give predictions for the future. What it does give is it can give us insight into our nature, into our personal qualities, into our strengths, into our abilities. And therefore, through that, we won't predict our future, but we can learn how to work with our natures to actualize who we are. And so, as we're going to see, there can be a value in looking into astrological readings. And this would be based upon the day of the week that we were born. And why would the day of the week or the time or the month we were born affect us? We'll get to that in a minute. But let's just first look at some of the Talmudic teachings. So it says, if you're born on Sunday, if you're born on the first day of the week, then it says that person will be one who is a person who has qualities which are a person who will be a leader, either for the best or for the worst. Why? Well, the leader is because you're born at the beginning, and it's because both light and darkness were created on the first day. So this person will be a person of extremes. Person who was born on the second day of the week, on Monday, and remember this is the Jewish week, starting after Shabbat, that person will be a short-tempered person. Why? Because on that way the waters were divided, so the person will be contentious, will be a person of division. Person born on the third day of the week will be rich and promiscuous. Why? Because the vegetation was created, so it's sprouting abundance. Now, what we're going to see is that this doesn't destine us to be a person who is immoral. The question is, how do we use those drives within us? And what we're going to see is that the Torah is going to direct a person to try and moderate the negative ones, to channel the abilities, which sometimes might be viewed as negative, and to use those strengths in a positive way. Let's continue. The person who's born on the fourth day of the week, on Wednesday, this person will be wise and enlightened. Why? Because the luminaries, the planets, were created on that day, along with the sun and the moon. The fifth day of the week, the person, their Thursday, will be a person who does kindness. Why? Because the fish and the animals were created on that day. And fish and animals rely upon sustenance. They don't go hunting. So this person will be a person who is a giving person, as the earth gave to those who were created on that day. The person born on the sixth day will be a seeker. Why? Because Friday is a day where we're looking towards Shabbat, where we're driving forward, we're anticipating. So that person will be a person who will seek and could seek spirituality and positive things, or could seek self-promotion. It doesn't say. And finally, the person born on Shabbat, interestingly enough, there's a negative side of it because the Shabbat was probably desecrated during the birth. The mother needs we need warm water to keep things sterile. And even though it's permitted to do that, it's viewed a bit negatively. But there's also the upside seems to me much greater, that this person will be considered to be a holy person because they're born on the day of holiness. So I know everyone's going to run home and look online and try and figure out what day of the week they were born. And we're going to see that there are many different inputs based upon these different astrological systems. So if you don't line up exactly, it might be another system. It might be the house, the time you were born. It might be the month you were born that resonates more. But the larger question is, well, now, before we get to that, let's look at another system. The other system has to do with what are called houses, or the hour in which you were born. And according to this system, also in the Talmud, each day starts with one of the planets, and then at 1 hour increments, it goes through the different planets, each one having its impact depending upon the hour. And uh, this system is found the uh, in the Talmud and in the Kabbalah already. And to calculate it, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his work on the oldest book on Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah, which will be the source for some of our Kabbalistic astrology, and just show the uh, legitimacy of the astrology in Kabbalah, it goes all the way back to our earliest work of Kabbalah, Sefer Yetzirah, attributed back sometimes to Abraham or even to Adam. And it talks about what are called galgalim. So galgalim means literally a circle, or a wave in modern Hebrew, but it means the rotation of the planets. And what we're going to see is that even the days of the week are actually named after the planets. Sunday being obviously the day of the sun. Now, for the other days of the week, you need to go into the more Latin languages, which correspond, in which the days of the week correspond to the different planets. And in French, Monday is lundi, which is lune, which is the moon. 2 days mercredi, is mardi, which is Mars. Wednesday is mercredi, Mercury. Thursday is jeudi, Jupiter. And and Saturday would actually be Saturn, which in the Hebrew is close to Shabtai, which is the Shabbat. So what does it say? It says the sun person will be radiant, transparent, self-sufficient. The Venus person, rich and promiscuous. The Mercury person, enlightened. The moon person builds and destroys. You see the themes overlapping with the days of the week, but not aligning with the names per se, but would align with the Kabbalistic system of which days start. And it would be each day's beginning at sundown would have this planet corresponding to it. Then you would have Saturn, which will be, here it says, you'll be for naught, you won't add up to a lot. Jupiter will be a just person, and Mars will be a violent person who spills blood. And the Talmud there gives Mars, the violent person, as an example of someone who could channel their nature. While it might inherently seem like a very bad nature, the person who has this nature can become a butcher, or they might become a thief. They can become a bloodletter or a circumciser, or they can become someone who's very cruel. They can become a soldier who will protect people, or a thief. So it all depends how you use it and how you channel it. Now, the Talmud then goes into, after setting down the astrological systems and influences, raises the question, the larger question of, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we're predestined to have these natures? And does it mean that there's a certain path in life that's going to be led by by the person who is under that influence? And there's a debate. Rabbi Hanina says the planetary influence gives wisdom, the planetary influence gives wealth, and Israel stands under the planetary influence. And everyone is subject to this, is influenced by it. Once again, not fated by it. But there's a much more open position. Rabbi Yochanan says Israel is immune from planetary influence. He's saying, no, you've just had all these people teaching these things, but it doesn't apply to us. It doesn't apply to the Jewish people. Why only not Jews? We will see in a minute. So what does that mean? So the Talmud then tells the story of Abraham. Abraham, it says, looked into the stars and he saw that he was destined not to have a child. God promises him that his descendants will inherit the land. And he goes to God and he says, I saw that, and it says, Abraham said, sovereign of the universe, how can I, he implying he didn't have children. He said, it's going to be my disciple, a member of my house who will be my heir. He had the servant Eliezer. He'll have to take over for me and inherit the land because I don't have a child. And God, and this is in the Midrash, this is in the Talmud, not in the Torah itself. God, Abraham just asked, how do I know? How will it be? So God answered, a child will be born to you and will become your heir. But Abraham says, I've looked into the constellations and I see I'm not fated to have a child. God, how can that be? So it says, God brought Abraham outside and showed him the stars. And he said, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. Now, what does it mean he brought Abraham outside? Literally, it means he brought him outside of his tent. But there's a deeper message, and the Midrash particularly looks at the deeper meaning. It means he was taken, look at the bottom line here, go outside of your planetary gazing. In other words, he took him outside the planets. He took him above the planets to look down on the stars. And the implication is that through one's merit and one's actions, one can break out of the planetary influence by connecting to the Almighty. One's connecting to the source of all, and that is above. And in the Kabbalah, the planetary system, the astrological system, the planetary influence, is the lowest of numerous spiritual dimensions, spiritual levels, if you will. The Sfirot, the 10 Kabbalistic energies, are above that system. And then there's the world of emanation above that. So we're being told, what does it mean? Israel is immune from planetary influence. It means we can supersede that system. We can either rise above it, or we can even bypass it completely. Now, it's not just limited to the Jewish people. Any person who would connect to the Almighty and who would have that merit could do it. But as part of the Jewish people, we consider that we have a communal merit to be able to accomplish this. We have a communal infrastructure and strength to be able to do it. And we have a Torah, a spiritual guidebook, to help us to do it. So that's why it talks about Israel as a people being able to bypass this system. Now, there's several stories in the Talmud. I'm going to share with you two of them that illustrate this. The first one was that a young child was born, and his mother was told that he was going to be, that from the stars, it said he was going to be a thief. So she turned to the rabbis and she said, what do I do? And they said, keep his head covered, wear a head covering, and through that he will not come to steal. Now, this is also, interestingly, one of the sources for wearing a kippah, wearing a head covering. And a kippah in Yiddish is called a yarmulke or yara malka, which is actually Aramaic for awe or fear before God. So the yarmulke is there to remind us that God is above us. So this child was told, keep your head covered. Now today, it is common practice for observant Jews to keep their heads covered all the time. Or in earlier times, it was particularly Torah scholars, or when you were praying that you would cover it. Today it's become mainstream to cover it all the time. But this child was walking along and got tired. They lay down under a tree and went to sleep. Their head covering fell off. He woke up, he looked up, he saw the fruit, and he grabbed the fruit off the tree, and it was a private field, and he stole illustrating the point that one can do things to temper one's nature and to respond to uh, to one's nature. And that would actually be, in fact, reinforce the idea that maybe one should look at one's astrological nature in order to know how to work with it. The second story involves Rabbi Akiva, and his daughter was getting married, and the astrologers told him that his daughter was fated to die on her marriage day. Yikes. Interestingly, it doesn't say he went to them, which would have been forgiven, but they told him. So now what does he do? So it seems that the wedding went on. He did not believe that this was fated. So he goes to um, the next morning, he goes to the wedding, uh, doesn't even seem to have alerted his daughter. The next morning, she comes to him and she said, "You won't believe what happened. Total miracle. After the wedding, I was getting changed, and I took my brooch and I stuck it in the wall." Now, they had stone walls. Apparently, she stuck the brooch between the stones to just make sure she doesn't lose it. And the next morning, when she pulled it out of the wall, there was a snake which had been pierced and killed. Poisonous snake, which might have bitten her that night. So Rabbi Akiva said to her, "What did you do to merit to be saved like that?" She said, "Let me think." She said, "Everyone was busy at the wedding. There was great excitement. And I saw at the door someone who walked in." Now imagine, you're at the Pierre Hotel at your wedding. You're sitting up on the bride and groom's table. You notice at the entrance a beggar coming in, disheveled. Some people might call over the waiter and say, "Make sure that guy doesn't come in." What did she do? She saw he was being ignored. She got up, picked up her plate, walked over to him, sat him down, and gave him to eat. And Rabbi Akiva said to her, "This is a demonstration of the teaching, charity saves from death." So we see once again that it's a merit or working with one's reading that can overcome the astrological reading and change one's fate. Now, the Talmud about Abraham says something interesting. It says that God then took the planet Jupiter and moved it to another place to correspond to Abraham's new destiny. So, reinforcing the idea that there is planetary influence, but that we can overcome it. And if we do, then the system has to be recalibrated to account for this new destiny. Now, let's get to the bigger picture. The bigger question is really, why should, when I am born, the month, the day of the week, or the hour make a difference in who I am and what I become? And for this, we turn to an article by Rabbi Ari Kaplan. And it was in a volume collected of writings that he had not published, so it was published posthumously, in a volume called Immortality, Resurrection, the Age of the Universe. And in there, he has an article on angels and the stars. And what he says is this. Now, just out of analogy, if you think about the moon, right, we see physically how the moon has an impact upon the physical world. The tides rise depending upon the rotation of the moon. Similarly, we believe the planets have an impact spiritually depending upon their rotations and their positioning. Why would that be? So here we have to introduce another theme, which we're going to talk about more at length in another talk, which is that of angels. The Torah has angels appear in the book of Genesis. Angels are mentioned throughout the Torah and the Talmud and the Kabbalah. And what is an angel? An angel is really a spiritual energy. It's a way of God we believe in God's absolute unity, and yet we live in a diverse world. So in order to bring about the diversity of that world, God creates spiritual energies which carry out different missions. So these spiritual energies, though, are each distinct. And in the spiritual world, different energies are separate. how do you blend them? How do you join them? How do you combine them? How do you have them interrelate? So physical bodies can be brought closer, can be brought in proximity, can interrelate. So the basic idea is that each planet, in a sense, has a spiritual nature to it. Just like the human body is the house for the divine soul, for the spiritual soul, so to the planet, in a sense, is the physical locus for different angels or energies that God channels into the world. And so, where those planets are physically located in relationship to where one is born will have an impact upon one's nature as one is being born, or upon the events as one is being born. And so, it's not a magic system, it's not irrational, it's a metaphysical system combining the physical and the spiritual worlds. And so, if you look at the mainstream astrology, the months, which the Jewish system will also work with, we'll see in a minute, the month system of astrology, I was born in September. I'm a Virgo, and sure enough, I have personality traits that correspond to what Virgos are supposed to be: rational, planned ahead, organized. Yet that's my sun sign. Each planet uh, has a sign, and so my moon sign is actually Pisces, which is flowing, more emotional. And so the sun sign is how one externalizes to the world. The moon sign is more internal. And so when one's chart is read, and as I mentioned before, these systems are complex, and one really has to be very knowledgeable. And so if you really want to know, you do have to go to someone there. And there are Jewish religious Jews who will do an astrological reading based upon different systems. You can ask them which system they're using. Usually it's a combination of Jewish and general astrology, which raises the question of where does general astrology come from? And if Sefer Yetzirah, this ancient book of Kabbalah, has astrology, would that not mean that it might have Jewish origins to begin with, or universal spiritual origins? And so one can have one's signs read. Now, the signs that we use for the months are the astrological signs, and they're constellations that go upon the axis of the sun around the earth, and there are 12 of them. There are actually apparently 88 constellations in all that are recognized, but the 12 primarily ones are the ones along the axis of the sun. And here we have a diagram of that axis from a book by Rabbi Avram ben Chia, already in the 11th, 12th century. He was one of the first Jewish philosophers, Kabbalists, to diagram out this system. And his teachings were based upon earlier sources. In Sefer Yetzirah, we're told that there are three components to heaven and earth: Tli, which is the North Star, the orientation of the globe; Galgal, which is the ecliptical rotation and the 12 constellations on it; and Lev is the earth with the heart of the earth. So you have, in a sense, you have time, space, and Tali is viewed almost metaphysically. Fundamental concept in Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, is that you have time, place, and soul. Zman, Makom, and Nefesh. So there's another component in Sefer Yetzirah, which tells us that the world was created with the letters of the alphabet. And so, according to Sefer Yetzirah, the astrological systems are also based upon the letters of the alphabet, because the letters are really the energies with which God created the world. So they're the foundational building blocks of reality as we know it. So there are 7 double letters. For instance, we know Bet with a dot in it is Vet, but there's 6 others as well. These correspond to the 7 planets, which will correspond to 7 days of the week, 7 parts of the body, and 7 dimensions of 7 qualities in the world. And Sefer Yetzirah is not just a book of teachings, it's actually a book of Kabbalistic practice. And that's exactly what Rabbi Moshe Cordovero said one should not be practicing if you are not over 40 and if you do not know the entire Torah already. So those practice would be vocalizing the letters to channel these energies and to connect to them. The letters are also used for the monthly astrological system in the Kabbalah. These are called the simple letters, which are not doubled and do not have the nekudot in them. And here we see the lineup of the different months and the corresponding qualities and even the 12 tribes corresponding to them as well. And there are 2 notable overlaps between the monthly astrological signs and the different themes in the Torah. The first one, and here we have the Hebrew months corresponding to the sun signs, the astrological signs as they're generally known. And we're going to focus on 2. The month of Nisan is spring, is April, and that is Aries. And there's a correspondence between the sign, which is Aries, which is the sheep, and a significant event in the month of Nisan, which is Passover, and particularly the Passover sheep, the Passover lamb, which was sacrificed. And Nachmanides, the great medieval rabbi and Kabbalist, tells us that the slaughtering of the Passover lamb corresponded to the astrological theme. In what way? So the lamb was considered to be one of the gods. Knatum, or sometimes known as Ra, was one of the most powerful gods. It was the god of the waters, fertility in the Niles, and it had a sheep's head and a human body. And Nachmanides says that the reason for the slaughtering of the Passover ram is because Aries, the sheep, is at the height of power in the month of Nisan. And the slaughtering of the lamb was to tell the Jewish people that it wasn't the power of the constellations that brought them out of Egypt, but the Holy One, but the Supreme God, the God of Israel. And according to one opinion of the rabbis, Nachmanides is telling us this in the Middle Ages when they didn't have archaeology, but they knew that the Egyptians worshipped it as a deity. So slaughtering the Passover lamb was showing that the astrological sign was not ruling over that month, but the God of Israel had power over any of those signs and any of those energies. That's the first one. The second one is an overlap of themes that reinforces, that dovetails, that parallels the astrological theme, which is in the fall. The month of Tishrei, which is the month of Rosh Hashanah, which falls on the 1st of Tishrei, is the sign Libra, the scales. And sure enough, the theme of Rosh Hashanah, we're told, is the theme of judgment, where people are being evaluated for their year and for their actions. And that theme also reinforces the question of predestiny, fate, and free will. Because it's really telling us that if everything is subject to being judged and put on the scales, then there's human accountability. And This is told to us very explicitly in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses in his farewell speech says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses. I've put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants will live. So the Torah is giving us an injunction, is telling us that we need to choose to use our free will to determine our own fate. And yet, at the same time, that doesn't mean we are a tabula rasa. It doesn't mean we can become anything we wish. We still believe that we are born with certain strengths. We believe that certain cards are dealt out to us. And so the rabbis tell us in the Ethics of the Fathers, everything is foreseen by God, yet free will is granted to man. The world is ruled with divine goodness, yet all is according to the amount of man's work. So really, it's what we do with who we are, with what we are given, and we have free will to then take that, and as we said, to work with it, to channel it, to respond to it, using our will and using our direction to determine the direction of our lives. And so astrology can be a powerful tool to understand the influences upon us, and at the same time to use it to realize that I'm not beholden to them, I'm not subjected to them, but they're part of who I am and part of what I'm working with to create my life. And I'll just end with two astronomical insights. Now we're not talking about astrology, the spiritual energies, we're talking about the actual physical universe. One is, and this is from Ephraim Pavlinov, who I drew some of the teachings in this talk from. You can see his videos on YouTube. He has a two-part series on astrology. And he points out, he's a science teacher, he points out that it's interesting that the sun and the moon are the same size in the sky because, as we know, the sun is much larger. In fact, the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. So why should it be the same size, exactly the same size as the moon? So it just seems to be that the sun is 400 times further away from us as well. Is that a coincidence? The Psalms tell us the heavens declare the glory of God, Shamayim Mesaprim Kavod Kel, and the sky proclaims his handiwork. Yadav Magid Harakia. So how is that? That through looking at the stars, through astrology and astronomy, it can bring us to a greater understanding and a greater awe before God's creation, because God created this incredibly complex astrological system, and he created an incredibly vast universe and astronomical system as well. The Talmud tells us that the number of stars is 10 to the 21, which is interestingly close to NASA's number, which is 10 to the 23. I mean, it's billions of years of stars different, but in the overall scheme, given that there are 6,000 stars you can see in the sky, how do the rabbis know that it's 10 to the 20-something power, which is we're talking about 1 billion stars in the Milky Way and hundreds of billions of galaxies, which is just mind-blowing. So we believe that the Torah gave the rabbis and gives us a deeper understanding of the heavens. That's part of the Kabbalah, is the inner workings of the spiritual world, the inner workings of the physical world. And through that, we can broaden our connection to our world, to the Almighty, and to the divine plan in our lives.